Well, first of all, you want to hit in above the pictures. You'll see a series of horizontal lines. You want to hit that one single horizontal line
Got that.
to eliminate the
Got
picture.
so all I got is whoever's talking.
That's right.
Okay.
Are you sure? That's all you have?
Yeah, and it's recording now, and you should have the first slide.
Okay. So we are recording. Go ahead.
Okay, you've all seen this before on, I think, just about every slide we have. Our personal safety is always the number one priority. If something happens to us, well, then we can't help the people that we've been trained to help. We always have to work as a team of two, right? And naturally, everybody's got their personal protective equipment, especially the N95 mask, which everybody knows what an N95 mask is now after the last year. And we got to keep in mind that whatever we do, we have to do what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. What's important, one of the things that's really important with this module is to be able to recognize through a size up the light, moderate, or heavily damaged structures. You know, it's not like we want to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, that maybe we'll never have an earthquake, right? And we're really being trained primarily out here to respond to earthquake disasters. But as I said in previous modules, there's something we can learn, something that we learn in each of these modules that we can apply to different situations other than a damaging earthquake. For instance, RPM, something you can apply when you run across a multiple vehicle automobile accident, or bicycles or motorcycles. This module, one of the things that I'll be emphasizing is being very thorough and systematic, which certainly applies if you're inside a structure. But it could also apply if you run across an incident where you have multiple vehicles involved in the accident, and you start at the beginning and work your way. Being systematic and thorough. Those are two words that really you need to take away from this, because you don't want to have to go back into a structure because you can't really say that you were thorough. So we want to know what it takes to size up a potential search, and how to classify structures light, moderate, and heavy. Most common techniques for searching a structure are pretty common, pretty logical. You go to the right, you go to the left, you use triangulation. And we'll talk briefly about safe techniques for debris removal. We won't get into that very much. Certainly there'll be no hands-on in this module. I don't know how recent this is. Some of you may have better information that's displayed on this slide, but certainly we are all aware that there's a significant chance of a magnitude 6, 6.5, 6.7 or larger earthquake in the Bay Area within at least the next 20 years. It could happen in the next 30 minutes. It could happen tomorrow. So we want to be prepared for that eventuality. Hopefully everybody that's listening to this, and I'm assuming you all are prepared, you have your 7 days worth of supplies. So here are our goals. Primarily, we got to keep each other safe, right? We're always going to be working in teams of minimum of 2. And that's easy to say, but it's sometimes difficult in the stress of the real situation when you're searching a structure to get separated, because responding to cries over in one room, noises in another room, lights on in one room and not in another. We really have to enforce that teamwork of minimum of 2 certs working together. And as in any triage situation, you want to get those walking wounded out first, or maybe they can help you if they're really not injured at all. We're going to rescue lightly trapped victims next, and the reason we're going to do that is because if someone is not lightly trapped and they're trapped more significantly, it's going to take a lot longer. We're going to have to devote a lot more manpower, a lot more time to extricating the more heavily trapped victims, and we don't want to get into a situation where we're spending all of our time with one person. That's kind of going to be something difficult for us to face, but that's what we try to teach when we're talking about triage. So first thing you do is you're doing a triage when you're doing a search of a structure. You start right there at the beginning where you have an opening to go in. Start your triage there. Now, if you have enough people, you'll be able to do transportation. We talked about that in the last couple of modules. But your primary job when you're doing a search is triage, classifying those folks who need immediate care and trying to give them immediate care through communication to a transport team. Size up. We want to evaluate everything that's going on. I mean, that's you look up, down, all around. Make sure that it's going to be safe. We don't have any fires. We don't have where we're going in or coming out. We don't have any tree limbs that may fall on us. It can be pretty detailed. You know, like I said, you want to look up, down, all around, and evaluate whether the structure is light, moderately damaged, or heavily damaged, and whether it's a type of structure that if it's moderately damaged, if you have an aftershock, maybe it will become more moderately damaged or more heavily damaged. Do we have the manpower? Do we have the person power? Do we have the certs? Do we have the equipment that's necessary? Do we have the communication devices that we need? Do we have first aid kits? We're going to have to evaluate ourselves and our capabilities before we actually start the search. We have to get ourselves organized. How are we going to document the location? That's a little bit difficult. If you have those handheld radios, that's going to be a little bit easier. But when we're doing triage, you know, the way we document triage is by tying tape around an arm or a wrist or an ankle, colored tape. And if we're doing triage properly, we don't really have time to write down a lot of information that might be helpful a little bit later on. So those radios could be very important, or relays could be very important. Something that's going to be one of those things you have to take into consideration when you're planning before you actually enter the structure. Okay, you've seen this a lot before. Stop, think, organize, plan. Well, the reason you want to stop is you want to take a deep breath. You want to evaluate the structure. You want to evaluate yourselves, your capabilities, the number of folks that you have, how you're going to get those organized, and you're going to come up with some sort of plan. It shouldn't be too difficult. The plan part is probably not going to be too difficult in comparison to getting yourself organized and thinking about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Now here's a big slide with lots of words on it. You can read those as well as I. There's that word there, facts. Gathering the facts is very important. And the way you do that is you don't take somebody else's word for something, you verify. And then in most of the classes that I've taught, I'll use an example of somebody coming running up and screaming and yelling and exclamating that there's a person who's laying down or yelling for help, and they're in the backyard of 352 Flaming Oak Drive in Pleasant Hill, and you need to go rescue them right away. And then they go running off. And I asked the question, what facts do you have? And the only facts you really have in a situation like that is somebody came running up, yelled out some information, and they went running off. You all witnessed that, but those are the only facts that you have. It's too easy in these types of situations to react to something that you haven't verified yet. So that might be part of the process to stop and think. How are you going to gather the facts, verify the facts, verify the authenticity of some of the information that you've gotten? Even if you get assigned something from the command post, it may not be based entirely on facts. Not everybody deals with this sort of situation as well as we'd like them to. And so you may be getting bad information or maybe only half information. So you want to make sure you gather all the facts you can. Prior to entering a structure, are there neighbors around? Are there people standing around that might have some information available concerning whether there are any people inside, where they might be located, that sort of thing? Those are all part of your plan at the very beginning. We're going to assess whether there's light, moderate, or heavily damaged structure. And what are the probabilities that if we have an aftershock, that it's going to endanger your search party? We establish our priorities based on our triage. We make our decisions based on not only the results of the triage, but we make our decisions based on the number of people we have with us. If we have only 2 people that are doing the search, well, there's limited in what they can do. They have to do the triage to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But if you've got more than 2 people, if you've got a third person, let's say, they can be writing some things down. They can be doing the communicating with the radios. They can be helping with the decision-making process. If you got 3 people voting, sometimes it might be a little bit easier to make a decision than just having 2 people. You may have a divergent points of view about something. We always want to evaluate our progress. That just kind of comes naturally. Okay, the time of event and day of week, we've discussed that pretty thoroughly in classes in the past, and people have a pretty good idea of what that means. Like if we're in a residential area and it happens to be on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, where are most people going to be? And generally speaking, you could say in California, both adults may be working and kids may be in school. There'd probably be a stronger likelihood of that than if it's on a Sunday at 9 o'clock in the evening, where people are going to be in their structure, and how many people are you going to encounter in the residence. Type of structure is important. We've talked in the past about unreinforced masonry and how dangerous that can be. If you've been in downtown Martinez, on Main Street, there's a lot of unreinforced masonry structure there that can be very dangerous in an earthquake. You all realize that. There's still plenty of unreinforced masonry in San Francisco. We have unreinforced masonry in certain sections of Walnut Creek. Not much in Pleasant Hill. The weather is a factor. If it's raining, naturally, people are going to be getting wet. Your victims could be getting wet, and your search team can be getting wet. That's something you have to consider. How are you going to protect the search team? How are you going to protect the victims? You're going to establish a medical treatment area outside, or could you possibly find a structure that is lightly damaged that it would be worth the risk to establish a treatment area inside? You have more control over the environment. What hazards are in existence, and you're inside a structure? Does it have a floating ceiling that could possibly come down? Internal structures that can come down, or if you're outside, what hazards are there? It could be the weather. It could be you're under a tree. It could be you're too close to the structure. It's unreinforced masonry. I already talked about occupancy, and we want to gather those facts, right? I think I probably beat that up enough. Okay, we're going to assess the damage, lightly or moderately or heavily damaged. This structure could be classified as lightly damaged, although there's a lot of things we have to be wary of. You notice this chimney on the right, which they don't build chimneys like that in California anymore. In fact, I don't even know if they build chimneys anymore, but they don't build brick chimneys anymore. You can see obviously part of that chimney has come apart, is laying on the roof. You've got two windows up there on the roof. One looks like it may still have glass in it. The other may not have glass in it. There's a reflection on the main window that's facing us to your left from the door. There's a reflection, so that would indicate to me that there's no broken glass. So those are hints to whether you classify it as lightly or moderately damaged. The biggest problem I have with this structure is the entranceway. There's a nice big door there, and that might be the way you'd have a tendency to enter the structure, but it's got that overhang, and that overhang is being supported by those two pillars on the right and to the right and left of the door, and those can be a pretty weak point to supporting that porch structure. So I would be inclined to maybe look for a rear entry point. Those are some of the things you might look for with that type of structure. How you get in, how you get out. We already talked about those hazards up on the roof. Is it safe to enter? It's lightly damaged structure, so we would consider it safe to enter. Already talked about potential for occupants and interviewing neighbors or folks that are hanging around. And certainly when we're doing a 360 before we enter, you go around the entire structure as best you can, take a look at it from the standpoint of the entire 360 degrees of the structure. Go ahead and you want to call out in a loud voice, and then everybody be quiet so you can determine where people might be located. That would simplify your job. If you get one person that answers you and they say, I'm in the living room, is there anybody at home? Anybody else at home? And they say, no, I'm the only one here. Well, that kind of simplifies your job, right? Because our job is not to go in and search the entire structure if the one person inside says, no, I'm the only one here at home. So that call, if somebody answers to your call out, it could be really very significant to you and your search. This has never been a great slide for a lightly damaged structure. I like the previous one a little bit better. There's something on the roof and about in the center of that photograph. I'm not sure what that is. I do know that the gutter, it looks like that white gutter running along the horizontal length above those two windows. It's certainly straight, it's not hanging. I don't see any bricks on the ground. We can't build brick structures in California anymore. We have not been able to for a long time, but you can have a brick facade, and sometimes those facades are not attached very well. So you have to, if you have bricks like this looks like it's brick, could be a facade, and especially over there to the right of that photograph, some of that facade could come down and could do some serious damage to people. The windows look like they're still intact. You get a good reflection on the window on the left. So with what we can see in this photograph, you would classify that as lightly damaged. We still do a 360, try to locate any folks by calling out. We do our triage, prioritize removal through the triage, and maintain our communication with anybody else that may be with us that could take out any folks that are classified as immediate, or we could communicate outside. If there are folks outside that are waiting to come in, or the people that are getting certain people are getting organized outside while you're doing your triage. You know, this slide has always created a little bit of discussion. It's classified as moderately damaged. However, if you take a look at the stairway to the left, the concrete stairway to the left, looks like there are probably 4 steps leading up to the entrance to the house. And there's a space of about 1.5 foot, it looks like, between the top of that concrete stairway and the structure itself. And that gray area below the door, that flat gray area there, was the porch, which I'm assuming was level with that top stair. And so that indicates to me that entire structure wobbled or slid off of its foundation. Now the roof line above the door looks pretty straight, but you know it took quite a rattle, because you can see there's a round beam laying across the ladder-like structure that's to the center and to the right, which actually was a handhold for the porch, and that round beam went up to the outside corner of that porch and helped to support that part of the roof, which indicates to me that it's pretty unstable. That's a little bit scary to me. So I think you'd have a choice of classifying that as moderate or heavily damaged structure. If you classify it as heavily damaged structure, then CERT cannot go in. You can still do a 360. You can still yell out if there are people inside, even though you can't go in. You can reassure them that we are aware that they're in there and that there will be some people coming out to help them. So don't let them think that they're forgotten. Now, if you classify it, like I said, as heavily damaged, I don't think anybody is going to dock your pay or they're going to fire you because you made a decision that it was heavily damaged rather than moderately damaged. If you decide that it's moderately damaged, well, then if you send in a search team, send in the minimum number of folks that can do the triage, have the minimum number of people inside, and have them in there for the minimum amount of time. Unless this is later on the second day and you've got a couple of people that you really don't like, well, send them in and tell them to have a party, and you'll be back in a little while to check up on them. So we can call that a moderately damaged or lightly damaged or a heavily damaged structure. Now, there's no question, there's never been any question in anybody's mind that this is a heavily damaged structure. If you think it's a lightly damaged structure or moderately damaged structure, then take your glasses off and clean them and try that again. Obvious structural instability, total wall collapse. What we see on top of the cars looks to me like the second story. You look over to the left there, the far left, there looks like a big steel pipe of some sort that's helping to support everything above it. There are structures in Pleasant Hill near DVC that have underground garages that are supported by big steel pipes just like that. And I think that that we get a rocking earthquake, that could be a serious problem. Certainly, if anybody's down there in the garage, it's going to be serious for them. Otherwise, it's going to be serious to the insurance companies because all the cars are going to be crushed. So that's a heavily damaged structure. I hope nobody has a problem classifying that as heavily damaged. Okay, earlier on, I said, I talked about one of the things you take into consideration is how close are you to the structure that is damaged. And the reason that I brought that up is because there's a collapse zone 1.5 times the size, the height of the structure itself. So if you have just a two-story residence, and it's an old residence, maybe even unreinforced masonry, it's 2-story, and it collapses. The collapse zone is about 1.5 times the height of the building, because when a building collapses, it doesn't collapse just straight down on itself. It collapses in such a way that it spreads parts of itself out in the direction of its collapse. That's why we have to be aware of collapse zones. Okay, natural gas. Shutting off the natural gas. We don't want to be in a big hurry about shutting off the gas if it's a lightly damaged structure, because PG&E does not want us turning on our own gas if we turn it off. We will turn gas off if we smell gas, if we hear gas escaping, or if the dial for the meter, the dial in the meter, a couple of the dials will be spinning very rapidly. And we have to take into consideration if it's a heavily damaged structure. If it's a heavily damaged structure, are we going to get close enough to it to turn off the gas? We have to be thinking about our own safety. So there's several things to consider. If it's moderately damaged structure, then we're going to take a chance to turn the gas off if one or more of those other symptoms of a gas leak are occurring. Hope everybody's got that. Smell gas, hear gas, spinning of the dials, and we have to think about whether we're going to go and turn that off if it's a heavily damaged structure and we're within the collapse zone. We've already talked to you about rescuer safety and why that has to be a primary concern. Sometimes you kind of think there's a little cold because you got people that are depending on you. Well, it's for that exact reason that rescuer safety is really important. And if you have to classify that structure that we saw that's moderately damaged, if we have to classify that as heavily damaged because we're just not real sure and we don't want to risk rescuer safety, well then we'll go ahead and classify it as heavily damaged, because rescuer safety is our primary concern. All the training, all this recurrent training, listening to me, all these years, you've dedicated a lot of time and energy, and you have a lot of skills that the average person doesn't have, and it would be a real waste for not only yourself, but it'd be a real waste for those folks who need rescue if something happens to you. So we want to make sure that everything we're doing, we're considering rescuer safety as primary concern. And we rotate our teams. If we're going to be doing this for a period of time, a day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe, if we're called, we're requested to go into an area that's heavily damaged, San Francisco or Oakland or Berkeley, maybe, some of those cities, suburbs that still have some old structures in them. We may be doing this for a few days, and we're not going to get the proper amount of rest. We're not going to be eating properly. It's going to be more stressful than listening to me tonight, certainly. So we need to really be considerate of the effect on our teams. So all those things take into consideration and make sure that we give on our teams proper amount of rest, and that they have the appropriate amount of time to rest, to recuperate, and to eat properly. Talked about call out, make sure you listen. We can even do that inside. Systematic systematic and thorough. Okay, the closest way out may not be the way you came in. So when you're inside and you're doing your constant evaluation, one of those line items on the previous slide, you're constantly evaluating. One of the things you're evaluating is, how the hell am I going to get out of here if I have to get out of here in a hurry? If our primary concern is the CERT trained folks, we may have to, if we get a bad shaker and we're in a moderately damaged structure, we may have to cut out our search early and get the hell out. May go back in, may not. If we happen to be in a tall structure, make sure we check the elevator, but be very, very carefully when you're prying those doors apart, because there may not be an elevator there. Always assume the victims are going to be in some sort of shock. And certainly they're going to be somewhat confused and really stressed out. So that bottom line, the victims might be in shock or confused. I think you ought to just take out the mic and say that victims are going to be in shock of some sort. And there's going to be some confusion, because there's going to be some confusion on our part too. Okay, systematic and thorough. And you can see if you follow the arrows, you follow the same pattern each room that we go into. And if we have to, if we're in a room where we can't see can't see everything underneath the debris, well then if we've got some light, or we can get 3 or 4 rescuers looking at it from 3 or 4 different directions, we might be able to see without having to remove any of the debris, which certainly would be helpful in speeding things up, and would avoid injuring a possible victim that might be covered by the debris. Okay, well, this is the tough one that people have a hard time remembering. Just as you enter a structure, somewhere on the outside of that structure, with either engineer's chalk or the spray can, spray paint, some way you need to mark a slash, a single slash. You're looking at the slide I'm looking at. There's a slash of the X that goes from the upper right to the lower left. That's the first mark that you make on the outside of the structure. Make it so it can be seen by someone who may be driving by or walking by, riding by. For instance, if Jim is in his golf cart or he's driving by in his Maserati or something and he's in charge of the search teams, he wants to be able to see if he's got search teams inside, whether they've been inside, whether they are out, whether they've completed their search, that sort of thing. And you do all that with this symbol. So just before you go in, you make that slash upper right to the lower left. And to the left, where it says CERT A, that's the team, the search team, the date and time you entered the structure. You don't put anything else on there. See, a search team, date and time you entered. The reason we do that is because, let's say it's a 3,000 square foot, 2-story home. And CERT team A is 4 folks. And they go in at 14:30 hours, which is 2:30 in the afternoon. How long could they safely search that entire structure? Let's give them 30 minutes, or maybe even give them an hour. But if the time now is 1600 hours, which is 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm sorry, 4 o'clock in the evening, late afternoon, and they went in at 2:30, and it doesn't show like they've exited, well then Jim should be a little bit concerned about that. That's the reason why we label it that way. So when we come back out, we complete the X by making the slash from the upper left to the lower right, fill in the date and time that they left the structure. Over on the right-hand side where it says rats, broken stairs, NE, this slide says NE means no entry made. Well, if there's no entry made, well, they can't have anything below that X unless they can confirm that there's somebody still inside. If they didn't make any entry, then they can't enter anything in the very bottom part of that X unless they can somehow verify through voice call out that there's one person inside. If there's one person that yells out and they say, yeah, I'm okay, I'm hurt, I can't get out, and you haven't entered for whatever reason, maybe it's because it's heavily damaged structure, well then go ahead and you put in one live. But other than that, you make no entry, you're not going to have any date and time entered the structure. You're not going to have any date and time you left the structure because you didn't enter. Otherwise, to the right of that X are any hazards that you considered significant. Put in whatever is significant to you that you may think that would be important to another team that might go in. If there are no victims inside, make sure you go ahead and put X or 0. I kind of plan on using the 0 because everybody knows what 0 means, right? Might have some confused people if you put an X down there at the bottom. They may not really understand what that means, but so try using a 0. Okay, these are the markings that you may see on a structure or may be added to a structure after you've been inside. And they are put on there by structural engineers. These are not something that we do. If you encounter a structure that has a big square, the upper left-hand side of what you're looking at, the slide you're looking at, and it's a square, it's okay for us to go ahead and go inside. There's a low risk. But it's determined that if a structural engineer marks the other two, a square or rectangle with a slash in it, or a square with a rectangle with an X in it, then we are not to go inside that structure. That doesn't mean we can't do something. We can still do a 360. We can still call out. We can still make sure that our team stays safe. Don't walk around, don't get caught somewhere where there's going to be debris that could harm you. Don't walk around, don't do your 360 in the collapse zone. Be careful overhead power lines, overhead limbs of trees, that sort of thing. But you can still do a 360, you can still do something, you can still document what you do, and you can still notify command post that you've done the 360, the structure is labeled by a structural engineer, no CERT can enter, but this is what we found out. So there's still a lot we can do. Okay, now some of these slides can be a little confusing. You were referred to as rescuers. And I guess if you're doing triage, you are a part of a rescue team. But I like to think of the rescuers as the folks that are going to be entering in and transporting victims out, looking for those who need immediate attention first. We're not going to be stabilizing victims if we're doing triage. If we have extra folks with us, they can help stabilize them. Or if the victim themselves are conscious, unable to, if they're bleeding, or if they're sitting up, get them to lie down. If they're bleeding, maybe they can hold clothing or something over the bleeding wound. So there are some things that can be done even though you're doing triage. And we're going to evacuate the victims in that order, the immediates first, and then the delayed. Is that something you all remember now? RPM. Okay, how are we gonna transport these people out? How are we gonna extricate them? Well, first of all, I want to go back to, we're not going to be spending that slide about spending a lot of time to extricate one person. If they are lightly trapped, well then it only takes a minute or two to safely remove any debris from around them so they're no longer trapped. Well, we can do that, but we're not going to spend a lot of time. If somebody's screaming and yelling and they're very heavily trapped, we can't spend the time for one person. It'll be a hard call to make, but we have to do that because we really have to remember to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. We've talked on infinitum about lightly, moderately, heavily damaged structure so that the general stability of the structure we're in is going to determine whether we're going to be spending any time extricating anybody. How many rescuers do we have? Do we have the tools and equipment that may be necessary? Well, if they're only lightly trapped, well, we may not need any tools and equipment available. So let's get the people who are not trapped and need immediate attention. Let's get them out first, get them delayed out next. The next folks that are lightly trapped, get them out. And then if we have the time and the manpower and the tools, then we might be able to do something with those folks that are more heavily trapped. The problem with that is that it's a very, very difficult method to remember how to do it safely. And there are probably some ways you can do it with the right equipment, but you always have to remember to make sure that you as a rescuer or your team members are safe and that you're not adding to the problems of the victim. Okay, we talked about size up. A lot of decisions made. There's a lot of things you do to make a decision before you even enter the structure. Make sure you can call out in a very, very loud voice and make sure you listen. That can certainly help you when you enter the structure. Techniques, right, left, systematic and thorough. Systematic and thorough. Don't come out of the structure and have someone ask you, well, did you get everybody? And you think, I don't know. Well, you have to go back in and do the whole thing over again. We didn't talk about, we talked very, very lightly about levers and cribbing. I didn't even use that language. You're not going to really be able to do that. We're just not teaching that much because people just don't remember how to do that. And it's very dangerous for the victim and it's can be dangerous to the folks who are doing the rescuing. Lifts and drags, you can do that as long as you can do it safely. Drag certainly is one way you can pull somebody out of a structure. Put them into a chair if there's a chair available. Use your duct tape, wrap it around them, make sure they don't slide out if they become unconscious. Don't drag them downstairs without supporting the head. That could be a little bit dangerous. Are there any questions? Everybody awake? Nothing?
We're awake.
Okay.
Good presentation, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I should stop
Stop recordings.
the recording. And I've